Space Marines have a lot of armory options to bring to the battlefield in the form of tanks. There are 15 tanks within Codex Space Marines once you decide to ignore walkers, bikes and quads, flyers, speeders, or armoured suits containing other armoured suits, Turducken style weirdness, along with turrets and bunkers. There's an additional tank in the Imperial Armory too, so that's 16 tanks to choose from. So, how the hell do you decide which one to take in your army? Let's see if we can't get to the bottom of which tanks will suit your list best in 10th edition 40k. Welcome to my mini Grimdark. So we have the Whirlwind, Gladiator Valiant, Gladiator Lancer, Gladiator Reaper, Predator Destructor, Predator Annihilator, Vindicator, Land Raider Crusader, Land Raider Redeemer, Repulsor Executioner, Rhino Razorback, Impulsor, and Forge World's Astraeus. One of each of these tanks would take you just over 3,000 points of tanks. I'm going to ignore the 3 dedicated transports in this list for the purposes of this video. That's the Repulsor, Rhino, and Razorback. I decided at the last minute that reviewing dedicated transports in the context of these other tanks didn't make a lot of sense, so I'll do a video in the future dedicated to transport options and choosing between them. I'm not going to rank these tanks quite intentionally. Ranking systems are fine to an extent, but with so many different tanks that play different roles in the tabletop, the only way I could really rank them would be do so by looking at which tanks are played most in tournaments, and this seems a bit arbitrary, especially when you look at the recent Grand Tournament performances. The tanks most people take are not guaranteed to be the best tanks for your army. So in this video, we'll review each tank datasheet and I'll make comparisons where relevant. Just so you know, in almost all cases, with one very obvious exception that we'll come to, you get what you pay for. Some tanks are bargains, but generally the more you spend, the more you get. You'll need to decide whether you actually need more. If your tank is just going to operate as a mobile gun turret on the battlefield, do you care about paying points for transport capacity you aren't going to use? In terms of order, we're going in order of points cost ascending by today's values. We'll start with the cheapest and finish with the most expensive tank currently available to Space Marines. So, starting with the bargain bin then, we have 2 tanks that sit underneath the 150 point mark and both feel great value. At the price of a unit of 10 Blood Claws, you've got the Predator Annihilator coming in at 135 points. Datasheet wise, movement 10 inches is enough to get its relatively small footprint around the table very efficiently, and toughness 10, a 3+ save and 11 wounds isn't standout durable, but it's generally enough to keep it safe from most general purpose firepower. A couple of hits from something more dedicated to the cause will make light work of the Predator's hull though, and this is generally why it's a bit of a cheaper option on the list. Wargear wise, the Annihilator sports its Predator twin las cannon, as well as the option of either a pair of heavy bolters or a pair of las cannons. In 10th, it's then free of charge to take a storm bolter and hunter killer missile, so you may as well. Starting with the Predator twin las cannon, the single attack 48-inch range sadly needs a 3+ to hit, but does then sport strength 14 with rerolls to wound thanks to twin linked. As well as AP -3 and damage d6+1. It's hands down a very good anti-tank gun, though the single attack without modifiers to hit is inevitably going to let you down from time to time. So any buffs you can give it to hit will be well placed here. This is the only time I'm going to say this in the video for fear of just repeating myself over and over again, but the rapid fire trait awarded by the Tech Marine or Iron Priest is well placed on guns with limited attacks, and high damage output for giving you a better chance to get them on target to destroy things. The damage being d6+1 is obviously variable, but the Predator Annihilator's ability does mean you can reroll the damage roll against monsters or vehicles for each ranged attack. This is great, and it's likely where you're going to be pointing the tank anyway. After that, I'd take the las cannons over the heavy bolters personally. My purpose for taking Annihilator is to have a mobile gun turret that can take out opposition tanks, so las cannons feed into this agenda nicely. They have similar profiles to the main turret gun, just with strength 12 and without the twin linked trait for rerolls to wound. In theory though, for 135 points in a single round of shooting, you could do 3d6+3 damage to an opposition tank or monster. Yep, this 135 point tank can actually one-shot some of the toughest tanks on this video. We're deep in theory cave here, tunneling for idealism gems, and there are a couple of reasons we should be mindful of reality check cave-ins. Aside from the variable dice rolls, which will absolutely let you down from time to time, the Predator doesn't have the durability to take what it gives out. In a game of ping pong against an opposition heavy tank, you're probably gone in a round or two. The thing is, you might actually not mind if you're able to do enough damage to the heavy tank opposite you to make it more vulnerable to your infantry. For 135 points, the Predator can be sacrificed for your wider strategy, unlike many of the more expensive tanks here. And for that points cost, I can't bet against this tank. It really is excellent for the cost to act as a mobile gun turret. You're sacrificing a cheapish infantry unit in your list to provide some genuinely solid range ranged fire out from your backfield, and if your opponent hasn't played against the Annihilator before, they might just underestimate it enough to be educated. One of my friends regularly takes 3 of these in 2,000 point games. That's 400 points to combine in making a lot of very scary firepower. I'm not necessarily condoning this behaviour, but a couple of these tanks for 270 points focusing their fire on the same opponent can suddenly make turning opposition tanks and dreadnoughts into charred metal much more reliable. Note of caution, this is a firstborn tank kit. Whether it survives another edition of Warhammer 40,000 is anybody's guess. It's likely that it's going to go the way of firstborn kits in 10th and find itself phased out eventually, but who knows. Whilst it's here, it's fantastic value for what it does, as long as you don't need it to do anything other than shoot tanks and monsters from range. Next up, the Predator Destructor. At 140 points, you get the same base profile, but you're replacing the Predator Las Cannon for a Predator autocannon. Its 4 attacks are standard, but rapid fire 2 and 48-inch range means you're usually going to be rolling 6 dice to try and get those 3s to hit. Strength 9's obviously no pushover, but it leans the gun into tough infantry rather than opposition tanks and monsters this time. Whilst AP-1 and damage 3 means it's killing standard Terminators with every failed save, but they will get a 3+ to save before further buffing. Natively, further buffing will come in the form of its Destructor ability. You get an extra pip of AP against infantry units. Terminators are now flipping a coin to survive. That's pretty good. You've got the same choice between the Heavy Bolter and the Las Cannon on your sponsons. This time I'd lean towards the Heavy Bolters to keep the unit focused on killing infantry and a single purpose, especially since the Heavy Bolters go to AP-2 with the unit's native ability. It'll probably depend on your other units though. If you don't have any anti-tank in your army, this could be a cheeky way to get some in, though keep in mind it isn't as efficient at this for this purpose as the Annihilator. All in all, as per the Annihilator, the Destructor is strong because of its points cost. At just 140 points, you get a mobile anti-infantry gun platform that's going to lay down some strong range support for clearing out objectives or softening up enemy tougher units ready for the charge phase. Honestly though, because my armies are usually very efficient in melee and more than capable of going toe-to-toe against most opposition infantries, I've never felt inclined towards the Destructor of the Annihilator. But that's because of how I build my armies and play. You'll want to consider these tanks in context for your army, not mine. So, from bargain bin to bottom shelf value items and the Gladiators. The Valiant first at 150 points. The Gladiator Valiant is a little unusual in this list. It's pretty hard to compare it to other tanks because its purpose is quite niche. This definitely means it's harder then to place into a lot of army lists as well, but it doesn't mean it's not good at what it does necessarily. Starting with the Gladiator profile, which is standard across the 3 variants. Movement 10 inches, toughness 10, 3+ save, 12 wounds, 6+ leadership, OC 3. For war gear, it has a turret-mounted twin las talon and a pair of sponson-mounted multi-melters. Starting with the las talons, you've got a good range at 36 inches, 2 attacks hitting on 3, strength 10 with rerolls to wound and the twin link train, with -3 AP and damage d6+1. The Valiant's priority target acquisition ability means that you get +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. Since that's what you're most likely going to be pointing at, you're likely hitting on 2s. That takes the gun to very good territory. The challenge with the tank is that the turret alone isn't enough to lift this tank above some others on the list. We need the sponsons to do something special. Honestly, they really can, it's just a little awkward to get it done. The pair of multi-melters have 2 attacks each, hitting on the 3s with strength 9, AP-4 and d6 damage. This is pretty good. That AP-4 is excellent against vehicles and monsters, but the strength 9 is disappointing and a weird challenge for melter guns in 10th in general. The guns do have an ace up their sleeve. They have melter 2 trait. This means at half range, the damage d6 becomes damage d6+2. Between the 2 multi-melters, if you do get them all on target and through the wound roll, that's up to 4d6+8 damage. I mean, that's mouth-watering to consider, right? As well as that lukewarm weapon strength though, the other challenge the guns have is with range. With only 18-inch total, that means your melter 2 trait is only activating at 9 inches. This is where the tank doesn't work for me. Generally speaking, I take tanks that provide either long-range firepower, whether that's anti-tank or anti-infantry, or for transport capacity first. The Valiant does neither of these first. At range, you'd be better off spending an extra 10 points in getting one of the other Gladiators, or actually saving points in taking the Predator Annihilator, really. And the Gladiator has no transport capacity to speak of, so you've got a tank buster that, to get true value, needs to get into short range. This is the bit that makes me hesitate. Pushing the tank forward will likely make it more vulnerable, and whilst its durability is good, it isn't exceptional. Ultimately, this is a good tank, it's just about making it worth its 150 points price tag, but the challenges with the multi-melters stop me to recommend it for most lists. You're going to need to build around its short range a little, and any buffs you can give its wound rolls will go a long way to make it more impactful. If you can do this, it has that capacity to mop up opposition monsters and vehicles with gusto. Next we have the Gladiator. You can consider this a direct upgrade from the Predator Destructor. Its primary focus is anti-infantry firepower. You've got 24-inch range with its twin heavy onslaught Gatling cannons. They get you 12 attacks hitting on 3s with strength 6 combined with twin linked for rerolls to wounds natively and devastating wounds when you score those 6s. This is an excellent combination and it'll often make up for the 0 AP and only damage 1. Better still, the gun gets sustained hits 2 when targeting infantry units. This is where you're going to want to point it. The Tempest Bolters are fine against infantry too. 24-inch range, 4 attacks hitting on 3, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. Their output increases considerably at 12-inch range where you'll get 4 extra attacks thanks to rapid fire 4. With no transport capacity and just slightly better durability, you're tossing up between the Reaper and the Destructor. There isn't a right choice. The Reaper is better on paper, hands down, but it's more points, so you get what you pay for. You'll really need to decide whether you'd benefit from the upgrade or prefer to spend those points elsewhere. The Gladiator Lancer is a very popular range support option for 160 points. Where the Reaper upgrades the Destructor, the Lancer simply upgrades the Annihilator. It's a range support tank focusing on cutting down opposition tanks and monsters down to size, and with its Lancer Laser Destroyer, it does it really efficiently. Yeah, I know, Lancer Laser Destroyer. That's a 3 AM naming decision if I saw one. No matter. This gun is what you're paying for. The durability and lack of transport capacity, we've covered that in the other variants, so your decisions on whether or not you want the good Predator Annihilator's las cannon output or the great Lancer output. For the Lancer, we've got 72-inch range, 2 attacks, 3+ ballistic skill, strength 14, AP -4, and D6 +3 damage with its turret. It comes with the heavy trait, so ideally you want to park it somewhere and don't move to get that +1 to hit. 2 hits from this have the potential to do 2d6 +6 damage. That's around 12 to 14 damage on average. You can one-shot a good number of walkers, tanks, and monsters with this gun, and you'll never get bored with doing so. The problem, of course, is the limited number of attacks, and 3+ to hit really. Staying still for +1 to hit sounds great in theory, but in practice you're probably going to need to open up firing lanes. It won't be common for your optimal target to park themselves in front of your dedicated killer, and if they do, it's likely because it fancies its chances against you. The Lancer's durability isn't any better than the other Gladiators, so a big gun on the opposite side of the table could take you out of the game before you get to do much. At 160 points for a formidable weapon profile, that's your trade-off. I'd take this upgrade from the Annihilator more times than not, though. And that's an understatement. I take the Lancer every time these days. The Lancer rarely feels like it's failed to meet its price tag, and frankly, it gives my melee force a very real ranged threat that needs to be respected by the opponent. I generally tag team it with either a Dreadnought or a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike if I have the points. It just gives the opponent so much more to think about, and if they fall into the trap of splitting fire, the Lancer will generally get a couple of rounds of shooting in, and usually that's all it's going to need. So, moving up to the middle shelf items, this is where things get pricier, and we come to the standard Repulsor. I underestimated this tank for a long time, I won't lie, but in my non-Space Wolves force I've come to love it. You'll see why I'm less inclined to it for my Space Wolves and dedicated melee lists in a moment. Starting with the Repulsor profile, it betters the Gladiator in toughness with 12 and wounds with 16. It also has an inviting OC5. The toughness in particular is really good since anything strength 6 or below is needing 6s to get through that hull. It has a heavy onslaught Gatling cannon. It's identical to the one mounted on the Gladiator Reaper, but without the twin-linked trait for wound rerolls or sustained hits 2 against infantry. That's definitely going to reduce its efficiency, but it's still a good gun for killing infantry. You've got a pretty nasty, albeit one-shot hunter-killer missile. The twin-linked heavy bolter and defensive array then increase your infantry killing efficiency a little bit too, but it's not what's going to draw your attention to this tank. The Repulsor's ace is its transport shenanigans. Firstly, it has excellent capacity, being able to load up 14 Adeptus Astartes infantry or 7 Wolfen jump pack marines or Terminators, or technically you could shove those Turducken Centurions in there if that's the way you're inclined. Additionally, it has a native ability that's going to take me a while to say correctly. Emergency Combat Embarkation. You'll probably tell from the editing I didn't get that right first time. What this means is that if one of your infantry units is within 3 inches of the Repulsor, and it's selected by your opponent to be a target of a charge, you can re-embark into the Repulsor. It's great fun. Your opponent wants to cut you down with chainswords, so you jump back into your big tank for the safety. Let's start with examples of when it works. You ferry a unit of Hellblasters up the battlefield, you jump them out, you scorch an opposition unit that's sitting proud on an objective. Happy days. It's your opponent's turn now. They get a unit up close and they're ready to charge your Hellblasters. So, you use this rule to jump back into the tank. Your opponent's now stuck scratching their heads and needs to choose a new target for their charge, whilst your Hellblasters are tucked away back in the Repulsor arguing about whose turn it is to choose the tunes. In your turn, assuming the Repulsor isn't in engagement range, you can then ferry your Hellblasters somewhere else, hop out and scorch a new target. all good. You can swap the word Hellblasters with any ranged output unit at your discretion here for the same result. This strategy is excellent, and the Repulsor's durability is enough to make it work really well. Just note, if your Repulsor is within charge range, your opponent can stop this nonsense and tag it in combat instead, so you'll want to be careful about your positioning. Now let me tell you when it doesn't work, unfortunately, as well as it should. This time you ferry a unit of Bloodclaws forward with a battle leader. They jump out and, well, they'll probably have to hide somewhere, since they can't charge this turn because they've disembarked from a transport and they're shooting its pants. Your opponent gets a unit around ready to charge your unit, so you jump back into the tank for safety, knowing that your Bloodclaws aren't very durable. Problem is, in your turn, when you jump out again, you're going to have the same problem of not being able to charge due to disembark restrictions. Awkward. This is where I'm remiss if I don't bring the journeyman tank that is the Land Raider into the discussion briefly. The Land Raider's native ability solves this problem for melee units, even if it doesn't have a fancy re-embark rule. In short, if you want a durable tank with some pretty good, if not great, anti-infantry firepower, with genuinely excellent transport capacity and an ability tailored to range support units, this tank is excellent for 180 points. If you want all of this for a melee unit, the 180 points suddenly doesn't feel quite so great value. If you can spring for a Land Raider, you're probably going to be better off. If you want something dedicated for anti-infantry and you don't need the transport capacity, I recommend you see Reaper or Destructor instead and save your points. Okay, at 185 points, we're back to a firstborn sculpt and the Vindicator. Movement 9 inches is a touch slower than the others in this video, but it's not to the point of problematic. You've then got toughness 11, a welcome 2+ save, and 11 wounds, as well as a bit of a boost to durability over its predator cousins. You're also paying for the Demolisher cannon. It's 24 inches range, so your 9-inch movement shouldn't hamper your ability to shoot the foes you want to. You just might need to advance a bit to get into range on a. You get d6+3 attacks hitting on 3, strength 14, AP -3 and d6 damage along with the blast keyword. It's a weirdly efficient gun against infantry, vehicles and monsters with multiple attacks, blast, but high strength and AP. The damage and range are its letdown for being a dedicated tank buster if that's what you're looking for, and generally that's why I prefer the Lancer. That said, the Lancer falls short against enemy tough infantry, where the Vindicator can enjoy dropping Terminators too, so it's arguably more adaptable on the table. I tend to think of this as a tough infantry killer, which just happens to be pretty good at putting a dent into tanks and monsters too. Its damage and attacks are variable, so you're lacking reliability, and even though it's tougher than most other firstborn Rhino chassis tanks, it's still not standout. Getting into range might make it vulnerable. It's got a pretty cool special rule where you can shoot your Demolisher cannon in combat as long as there aren't any friendlies in engagement range with the same enemy unit. This is obviously quite situational, but my small unit of Exalted 8-bound got a nasty shock earlier in the edition when I failed to take the tank down in one go on the charge, and my opponent rolled well enough to take out my World Eaters and return the following shooting phase. That's life, I guess. It's a good tank, and even at 185 points, I'd still argue it's got more places in your list than the Valiant perhaps, which is the other slightly weird tank in this video. For me personally, in my list, I find it's not impactful enough versus the other options for what I'd need it to do. But again, that's because it brings more of something I already have access to in my melee troops and not enough of the dedicated tank busting range support that I can get elsewhere and need. Great tank though, you'll just need to decide if a dedicated tough infantry killer is what you need most. After that, we've got the Whirlwind and the last Rhino chassis tank on this video. 190 points gets you a familiar datasheet and an interesting, although challenged gun profile. Straight up, I'm going to argue that the Whirlwind is overpriced and one of two examples on this list of a tank that doesn't get you what you pay for. The Whirlwind Vengeance Launcher is what you're paying for. My assumption here is that you're paying 190 points for a gun that has indirect fire capability so that you can actually use it. So you're going to hide this tank and shoot at basically anything on the table. So let's approach it from that perspective. 72-inch range with indirect fire means that you'll pick your targets at will unless they have special abilities to stop you from tagging them. You get d6+3 attacks with blast, making this weapon instantly inviting against infantry units. Although the datasheet says you're hitting on 3+, of course if you're using indirect fire it means you're always looking for 4s. That's not great. Note as well, you can't buff this. 1 to 3 always misses with indirect fire as per the trait. Whilst we're talking about landing hits, we can slot the pinning bombardment native ability in here. As long as you do hit your opponent with this gun, if they're an infantry unit, you'll force them to take a battle shot test. This is good, and situationally it could make a big difference. Strength 8 is good enough against infantry, even tougher units, but less effective against vehicles and monsters. AP -2 and damage 2 is good, again, against infantry, but they're going to get the benefit of cover if you're indirect firing, which you paid for this tank, so you are. The thing is, indirect fire is a novelty that armies can benefit from, and it can be very fun in casual settings. In practice though, the Whirlwind is okay, but its profile is only really impactful against infantry, and although blast helps, the variable attacks and 50-50 to hit makes it far too unreliable for its points cost. Honestly, I'd rather have a Destructor for much cheaper points and live with finding line of sight. Should you take a Whirlwind? If you play lots of Horde armies in your local meta, Orcs, certain Tyranid or Guard lists for example, then you might find use for the Whirlwind. If you just like the idea of indirect fire and are happy to leave your success in the laps of the dice gods, you'll enjoy the Whirlwind. Most of the time though, in my opinion, you've got better options. For both the Whirlwind and the Vindicator, previous cautions on Firstborn sculpt apply. Okay, we've started to climb the shelves and now we're reaching the products at eye level that really want to tempt you. To start with, the frankly quite scary profile of the Repulsor Executioner for a tidy 220 points. Let's just quickly acknowledge the fact that we're in big bucks territory now. You're investing a lot more points into a single model, so we really do need to get return in order to compete. If you don't get that return, you're wasting what could be close to a fifth of your army. The Repulsor Executioner sacrifices some of its transport capacity for a really big gun, which we'll come to in a moment. As a result, it can take 7 infantry inside, Terminators etc. count as 2, Centurions as 3. Situationally this could be good, but depending on the loadout options you might not want to use it as a dedicated transport. You've got a heavy onslaught Gatling cannon that you would get on a normal Repulsor by default as a secondary gun that makes the tank instantly okay against infantry at least. As a primary weapon you're going to choose between the Heavy Laser Destroyer and the Macro Plasma Incinerator. If you go with the Plasma Incinerator, you have a tank that's capable of putting dents into opposition tanks and monsters, but it's ultimately going to be very efficient against tough infantry. Variable but multiple attacks backed up with blast and at least damage 2 is great. You can spring for hazardous, you'll get a -4 AP and damage 3 with strength 9, but a roll of 1 on the hazardous test means you're down 3 mortal wounds. You're upgrading the Gladiator Reaper with a transport capacity, a tougher hull, and an additional tough infantry killing firepower that can chip away at bigger foes as well. It's a worthy upgrade if you're happy to spend the points. For me, if I'm taking the Executioner, I'm taking it for the Heavy Laser Destroyer. It's a direct upgrade from the Lancer Laser Destroyer, with 2 attacks putting out strength 16, AP -4 and damage D6 +4. It's a very scary gun and it can one-shot most tanks on an average Tuesday. One loadout isn't really better than the other, but because of the armies that I'm running, I benefit most from a Repulsor Executioner that's got a Laser Destroyer on the top for the dedicated range threat and higher durability that it brings. I'll not use the transport capacity, which might mean I'm paying a little bit for something I don't want, but the tank still feels like it serves very well given how threatening that gun profile is. But it is a big investment at 220 points, and against Horde armies in particular where you might not have an optimal target, the gun's going to be wasted and your points could have been better spent elsewhere. As I said at the start, one isn't better than the other, there's always a trade-off, and you'll want to think about this and what you want your tank to be used for, what it needs to contribute, to decide whether 220 points is worth spending here. I can get a Gladiator Lancer and have almost enough points left over for a battle leader for one of my units for the price of an Executioner. Usually, this is the direction I'd prefer to go in. Now we're in Land Raider territory. All Firstborn units technically, but who knows whether Games Workshop still thinks the Land Raider is a viable one for the Primaris era or not. I hope so. It remains a stable and a great looking tank. I'd really like them to upgrade the current kit a little and keep it in the range. We'll see, I guess. Starting with the standard variant for 220 points, it's beefy with toughness 12, 2+ save and 16 wounds. It has great transport capacity, being able to pack 12 Adeptus Astartes infantry, adjusting for Terminators etc. Possibly most appealing of all for a melee force, it has the special ability Assault Rank that allows units to charge even in turns that they've disembarked from the Land Raider. This is flat out excellent, and ultimately this is why the tank remains one of the most efficient ways to deliver melee units into combat. As well as the Hunter-Killer Missile, Multi-Melter, Stormbolter and Twin Heavy Bolter, you also get 2 of the Godhammer las cannons. 48-inch range, 2 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 12, AP -3 and damage D6 +1. It's quite formidable firepower and it could be interpreted as a transport. It's quite formidable firepower for something that could be interpreted as a transport vehicle otherwise. But it isn't Lancer Laser Destroyer formidable or Twin Heavy Onslaught Cannon formidable for tank busting or infantry killing efficiency, but in the context of a vehicle very well equipped to get your units to battle with high durability, the Land Raider also brings reliable shooting. For me, whether you invest in a Land Raider or not boils down to whether you want it for all of its facets. If you want it for its transport and its shooting and its durability, it's definitely worth the investment. If you only need 1 or 2 of of these features, the other tanks on this list are probably better options for you. The exception to the rule being if you want to be able to ferry melee units forward and have them be able to charge on the turn that they disembarked, because that's a unique trait to the Land Raider, so you're going to have to splurge for it. My Land Raider was stripped down and converted to the ruinous powers of chaos at the start of the edition. I do miss it at times, and if Games Workshop update the kit and keep the rules the same, which I am quietly optimistic will be their approach rather than to relegate this one to Legends, I'll likely pick up another when this happens. At 220 points we have the Land Raider Crusader. For the points you get a better transport capacity of 16 infantry rather than the Godhammer Lascannon. You get twin assault cannons with 24-inch range, 6 attacks, 3+ to hit, 6 strength, along with twin linked for rerolls to wound and devastating wounds for those critical 6s bypassing saves. You also get multi-melters, which are great damage, output at range, but flawed by being less impactful against tougher foes due to that strength 9. Everything else is the same as the standard Land Raider, so it's a gun exchange and the extra transport you're focusing on. The twin assault cannons is better for infantry in general, but it's hardly standout, so unless you want some extra transport capacity, I'd lean towards the standard Land Raider to get the las cannons personally. The multi-melters are great in the right situation, but unreliable in general, unfortunately, and need some help in 11th edition. After that, for the pricey 270 points, we've got the Land Raider Redeemer. Its transport capacity is 14, so middles the pack, but it's still very generous all in. You still get the assault ramp ability too, which is good. The main thing about this variant is the fact that you get 2 Firestorm cannons. These are d6 plus 3 attacks with auto hit through torrent, 12-inch range, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2, and ignores cover. They are very good, there's no doubt. If you're going to be transporting a melee unit forward to take on the opposition at close quarters, the Land Raider is probably going to end up within that 12-inch range. Strength 6 means they're definitely better at infantry removal, but auto hitting and ignoring cover with -2 AP means they are generally pretty good at it. The question really is it worth 50 points more than a standard Land Raider? Any tank over 200 points is a healthy investment in your army, but the Land Raider Redeemer is closing in on 300 points, and for me, again personally, that's too much for the impact it's likely going to have on the outcome of the battle. I'd probably prefer to go on a standard Land Raider, enjoy the las cannons for bigger foes, rely on the disembarking flurry of chainswords to take out the enemy infantry. But there is something undeniably fun about the Firestorm cannons, and that it does have its loyal following. So we've got one last tank to look at, and it's really a large one. Actually, it's absurdly big, the Astraeus. First of all, this tank is 525 points. That's a tidy sum of your army in a single model, and this is one reason to seriously consider if that's what you actually want. Its profile is borderline knight with wheels, with 10-inch move, toughness 12, 2+ save, 24 wounds, 6+ leadership, and OC 8. It also, similar to knights, has a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, but no invulnerable save against melee attacks. Despite its size, it has no transport capacity. It does have a lot of guns though, so I presume it's just full of ammunition. It has one native ability, which is good, not standout for 500 points really, but one unit hit by any of its ranged attacks is classed as being suppressed and will be at -1 to hit next turn. Okay, so that ranged firepower, it must be groundbreaking, titan busting for 500 points, right? Well, not quite. You can choose between a Las Ripper or a Plasma Eradicator and you'll get 2 of these guns, which is pretty impressive. That said, the Las Ripper is a worse laser destroyer, I'm afraid, whilst the Eradicator is a worse macro plasma incinerator for 500 points. You can switch out the heavy twin bolter for twin las cannon. Either profile is exactly as you'd expect with the twin link trait, but I'm still not seeing that 500 points yet. Oh, you can put an Iron Hill heavy stubber on then. No, wait, those aren't exactly exciting either. This is a big tank, like unwieldy big. Truth be told, even if you did put it on the table, if you have the amount of terrain you'd expect on a tournament table, you're just going to struggle to move the thing anywhere anyway. After that, and honestly, it just doesn't bring enough of anything to be close to worth 500 points when you start thinking about the units you could have had instead. Similar to some of the other Forge World model kits, the Astraeus is a brilliant hobby project first, and a gaming unit second. Like really distant second. I mean, Hobby Project is so far ahead that it's about to lap Gaming Unit, so Gaming Unit actually feels like it might be winning somehow, because it can see Hobby Project coming up behind it, but it isn't. It's really, really far behind. I actually think that when you factor in the cost of this unit, it's arguably the worst tank that Space Marines have available to them for the tabletop. And yes, I've played against it a few times in 10. I've never failed to butcher it despite the 24 wounds profile. It doesn't get invulnerable saves in combat, and it can't run away from or kill its equivalent points value in World Eaters or Tyranids. To be honest, my opponent in one matchup suddenly rolled a flurry of 6s, so its deadly demise of d6 plus 2 did more damage than its weaponry the last time I faced it. Alright, let's just leave the poor Astraeus alone for now. Here's my list of regular go-to tanks. Gladiator Lancer for dedicated firepower for any marine army, but especially my Space Wolves, where the rest of my force is already very efficient at killing infantry and medium-sized big bads. I've never felt like I've needed an executioner, but if you've got the points, it's a worthy upgrade. Standard Repulsor for standard marines for a bit of infantry killing firepower, but primarily for that transporting short-range firepower units jumping in and out fun at games. And although I no longer own one, if I did, Land Raider for a good, adaptable profile to transport melee units with that assault ramp ability. I do need to get myself a Land Raider. What about you? Where are your preferences and why would they work better for your army? Thanks for watching. Keep hobbying.